Good afternoon. Today we will continue talking about the factors affecting the peak shape. Okay, so we studied so far the factors affecting the peak shape due to a freestyle null group, and we discussed the strategies by which we can reduce the reactivity of silent nodes. And also, we start to talk about Van Demeter parameters, which relate directly to the particle distribution, particle size, particle shape of silica, which might directly affecting the elution pattern, which consequently will affect the peak shape. If you remember, we start to talk about longitudinal diffusion and also resistance to mass transfer, as well as eddy diffusion, or sometimes called multipath effect. So, just to recap what we mentioned so far, that height plate, which is the mathematical measure of bad resolution or broadening of the peak, will inherently included three factors. The first factor is A, which is the assumption of eddy diffusion as named by Van Demeter. The second factor is B factor, which is related to longitudinal diffusion. And the last one is resistance to mass transfer, which is term C. So we have three terms: term A, eddy diffusion; term B, longitudinal diffusion; whereas C is resistance to mass transfer, which is either resistance to mass transfer due to stationary phase, such as obstacles, clogging of the in the part of the column or TLC plate, whatever, cracks, if you have cracks in the silica bed in general. Also, resistance to mass transfer due to mobile phase, such as the variation in the mobile phase viscosity, which will allow some molecules to go through the stationary phase and prohibits others from going with the same rate in comparison with the first group, even though they are molecules from the same type of the analyte. This scenario will end up with what? With peak broadening. Now, Van Demeter said that if we have flow rate here, this is the flow rate of mobile phase. Flow rate high flow rate will reduce longitudinal diffusion, because when you push the analytes to go in certain path, you prohibit them to go longitudinal in this path. So by high flow rate of mobile phase, we reduce significantly longitudinal diffusion, which is unwanted diffusion, whereas the straightforward diffusion is enhanced by increasing the flow rate of mobile phase. Now, on contrast, or in contrast, the resistance to mass transfer will be increased when you increase the flow rate. The reason that when you increase the flow rate, you obligate the molecules of analyte to go, instead of being focused in certain in the middle of the column, they will go to the lateral parts of the stationary phase, and this will enhance the resistance to mass transfer significantly. On the other hand, the resistance to mass transfer will be also increased due to stationary, due to the increase of mobile phase, due to the destruction of silica particles. So when you have particles, okay, and you increase the flow rate of the mobile phase, particularly irregular particles such as this one or that one, with high mobile phase, they will be broken. Okay, part of these particles will be broken. Now, these degradants or the dismantled particles will be able to clog parts of these passages. So these small particles might clog some passages here, and this is a resistance to mass transfer. So we don't prefer to increase the flow rate drastically in order to reduce the resistance to mass transfer, and on the other hand, we prefer to increase the flow rate in order to reduce the longitudinal diffusion. So you might conclude from this talk that there is a range for acceptable value for the flow rate in which the resistance to mass transfer will be agreeable, okay. At the same time, the longitudinal diffusion will be also acceptable. So this is the range for the flow rate to be accepted if we put on the y-axis, if we put height plate. So height plate is mathematical, again, is mathematical term for peak broadening. So height plate means bad resolution, peak broadening, and consequently bad resolution. So if you increase the flow rate drastically, then you have what? You have increase in height plate. At the same time, in contrast, if you reduce the flow rate, then you will have also high height plate. But there is a minimum here, that in which the flow rate will be accepted due to low height plate, and usually from 1 to 2 mil per minute. So the majority of systems, we prefer the flow rate from 1 to 2 mil per minute, but not necessary in all systems. Okay, but this is the norm of flow rate values. Okay. Now, how can we reduce peak broadening practically? Now, in industry, I mean the column industry, the stationary phase industry, because usually we just purchase the stationary phase as columns, as we will see later on in videos of HPLC and GC. So the first thing, that the column should be as narrow as possible. The peak, the column should be as narrow as possible. Okay, so mathematically, if we reach the thickness to be almost zero, not zero, almost zero, okay, like the limit when you have in mathematics, limit x approach zero, when lim approach zero, the thickness approach zero, then longitudinal diffusion mathematically will be zero. But this is impractical, impossible to have it zero, but you have to reduce it as possible as you can. That's why the majority of application, particularly in gas chromatography, the use of column is capillary column. So capillary column is the type of the column preferred in chromatography, particularly gas chromatography. And again, the reason that the thickness is very limited, very low, and this affects directly longitudinal diffusion, or inversely, to be correct, inversely longitudinal diffusion. So we reduce, in this case, peak broadening due to longitudinal diffusion. Okay, and also, if we want to reduce multipath effect, the particle size should be evenly distributed. That the particle diameter, in other words, should be almost identical. Okay, and the same, in the same time, we prefer the particles of the silica to be spherical, although irregular particles might increase surface area, which increase separation power. But the problem with irregular particles, that they might be degraded due to high flow rate. Then, as we discussed, the high flow rate will dismantle parts of these particles, which significantly increase the resistance to mass transfer. Also, it is not easy if you have irregular particle to get them in an even bed like this. We call this bed particle bed. Now, particle bed more or less is evenly distributed. Okay, it is uniform bed. So you have identical paths for analytes. So all analytes will reach destination almost in the same time, and you will have what, very nice sharp peak. Okay, so try to get your column particles spherical as possible as you can, identical in shape, and well packed. In order to have them, you might have them like this, but not well packed. For example, here in the same bed, you will have some of these particles aggregated, and others are highly distributed. So this will increase the peak broadening due to multipath effect. So in order to get them well packed, you have to apply very high pressure on the silica when you fill it in certain columns, and this is done by the manufacturer for the columns. They use very high pressure in order to get the bed similar in each section of the column. If you have irregular particles with high pressure, you might have some degradation for these particles, and you will end up with bad performance of the column. So try to have them spherical. Try to have them in the manufacturer area identical in size, and they are compressed and filled under high pressure. Also, another strategy to reduce longitudinal diffusion, that you can use capillary column. Okay, now this is capillary column. If we dissect this column, we will see that, okay, and we will observe the column from this angle. Okay, we will see that there is plastic layer, which is the sheet over or cover. The sheet covers the column. Then instead of particles, you can add silica as layer. Yeah? And this is the hollow part of the column which allow the mobile face to go through. So you have in the core of the column, you have it hollow, okay? Then you have silica as layer, okay, as a single layer. Then the outmost layer will be plastic or any other inert material. Now, clearly that the path of analyte will be a single path. You don't have multi-path effect. You have uni path. You don't have any deterioration for the peak shape due to multi-path effect. Okay. So this kind of columns also in capillary column can be achieved. So the majority of capillary columns, they reduce the thickness to reduce longitudinal diffusion, and they have, instead of silica beads, you have just layer of silica in order to gain one path. But the disadvantage of one layer of silica, you will reduce the surface area. That's why the companies of columns try to increase the column length. Some of the columns might reach 60 meters. Okay, and when you have plastic, the column will be flexible, so you can just coil the column in order to have it feasible and geometrically acceptable. Uh, Nowadays we have technology called monolith. Monolith technology. Monolith from two Latin words. Mono means one, lith means crystal, but we don't mean it of a crystal. We mean that the column is one unit. And the monolith technology, like Merck Lith, which is related to Merck company, that they make silica, okay, as one unit. For example, simply they mix silica with some solvents. Okay. Now suddenly they remove the solvents. Okay. They remove solvent. And we know that silica and solvents they are not in solution form. They will be dispersed, just dispersed, without not in molecular dispersion. Just like a suspension. You have a slurry like clay. You have a slurry of silica in solvents, and then suddenly you evaporate solvents, like lyophilization in pharmaceutics. Okay, under low pressure and low temperature. In this case, if you have water, then you can just remove water particles by freeze drying, which is lyophilization. In this case, you will get what? Highly perforated rod. And these spores are due to the vacancies left by the solvent molecules. So vacancies lifted by the solvent molecules will make the rod highly porous, and you can exactly resemble this rod with old animal bone. If you see an old animal bone, you will find it highly perforated, particularly from the from the core of the bone, the same thing will be happening for this rod. Now this rod will be one part. The advantage of monolith that this highly perforated rod will increase drastically surface area. So you will have high surface area. High surface area means better separation, more exchange with stationary phase, and better separation. Also, in monolith technology, you can make fast analysis by increasing flow rate. Now, we don't have particles in order to be degraded by high flow rate. So, if you increase high flow rate, still you don't have deterioration for the resistance to mass transfer. You can increase the flow rate, okay? Usually, if you have solid material and you need to push solvent inside this solid material, you will gain physically resistance. We call it back pressure. We call resistance back pressure. And this will be a burden, will put a burden over the pump. The advantage of monolith that it is highly porous, so it will allow flow rate to go freely inside this stick of silica or derivatized silica without significant back pressure. So you can increase flow rate freely because there is no harm on resistance to mass transfer, and there is no significant back pressure on the pump, which is push the mobile phase, and at the same time you enhance, you reduce longitudinal diffusion by increasing the flow rate. So and in overall you will have very nice separation, and the extra advantage of monolith column, you will get separation in short time period because you use high flow rate. The result chromatogram from such column will be very nice sharp peaks like this, and in practice all of them they are well separated. They are well separated, and you can quantify each of them if you have reference material depending on the area under the curve, which we will discuss thoroughly when we come to talk about HPLC and GC. So these are the factors affecting the peak broadening, and the next lecture will be a revision for all factors affecting peak shape and peak resolution.